joining us as we conjure up some spirits of Binghamton's past. It's a downtown walking tour sponsored by P.A.S.T, the Preservation Association of the Southern Tier. P.A.S.T has been promoting historic preservation through tours, advocacy, and events for more than 44 years. Our program tonight features volunteers who are portraying important persons in Binghamton's past, and they are examples of what makes Binghamton and Broome County a great place to live and work. But let's not waste any more time. We're going to get going with our program because time is short. As Mr. Bundy says, time is everything.
We begin our tour tonight at Christ Episcopal Church, the oldest church in Binghamton, founded over 200 years ago. This building was built in 1853, although the steeple wasn't added for another 50 years. Joshua Whitney, one of the founding fathers of Binghamton, was a parishioner here. It is also rumored that his spirit haunts the second pew to this very day. But that's time for another story. Let's meet our first guest, Dr. Mary Ross.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mary Ross. I'm a family doctor and pediatrician. When I came here in 1909, infant mortality rates were absorbently high, and I made it my life's mission to change that, because children are what's important. They're our future. I was born in a log cabin in Ingersoll, Ontario, 7 miles outside of Toronto in 1878, and I came to the United States in 1889. When I wanted to be a doctor, I went to Cornell University, where I received my BA and my PhD. Then I was off to Johns Hopkins University for my medical degree in 1907. I interned at Baby's Hospital in New York City and did my residency at St. Luke's in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I moved to Binghamton in 1909. Many of my male colleagues discouraged me from setting up a practice. They said women doctors didn't make very good here in this area, that I would have to work amongst the poor. And work I did. I founded a baby clinic in what's now the First Ward in 1914 and also in 1919. And I worked at both these without pay until 1933. Well Baby Clinic staff members worked with the women, and they taught them how to mix baby formula and later how to cook and sew. Most of the women we worked with knew little or no English at all. They were immigrants. Their husbands had come here to work in cigar and shoe factories. If a woman couldn't make it to the clinic or the hospital, I made house calls. And I rode the trolley, and the trolley drivers got to know me by sight, and they would just slow down long enough for me to hop off at my destination. Eventually, I could afford a car. When I did arrive at some homes, I found them in such disarray that I went in and I washed dishes, helped prepare a meal, or even bathed the baby. And if I found a family was really in need, I would arrange for food and coal delivery out of my own pocket. But don't tell my patients that. And I told my patients that they could pay my fees whenever they had the money. I suppose I should mention my awards. They're silly, really. I didn't become a doctor to win awards. But I was named the Outstanding General Practitioner in 1953. The state tops women medicine in 1956, and Broome County's Outstanding General Practitioner in 1948. I was the first woman to earn the Hall of Fame Congress of American Legion Post 80s Man of the Year in 1956. Suppose they should change the name now. Do you know what I'm proud of the more awards? Was I appeared on the television show I've Got a Secret in 1956. 45 babies, now grown, were in the audience that night, and I got to speak to them after the broadcast. They are amongst the 5,000 or more babies that I helped deliver in my lifetime. I never had children of my own or a husband. Who has time for that? I did travel, though. I traveled around the world with a friend when I was 75 years old. And when I was 80, I went to Africa. That was 3 years before I retired. I passed away 4 years later, so on July 8, 1964. By the way, if you're one of those people that owed me money, forget about it. I stipulated in my will that the debt was forgiven. Use that money to make somebody else's life better. Because that's what it's all about. The greatest resource we have in this area isn't the buildings or the technology, it's the people. We wouldn't have our Broome County if it weren't for them. They designed the buildings and used the technology to make history happen. But it's all about our neighbors.
The Federal Building, formerly the Binghamton Post Office, was built in 1935. The local firm of Conrad and Cummings designed it. The architecture blends Art Deco features with classical elements. The lobby is decorated with murals painted by Cornell University art professor Kenneth Washburn. The murals depict scenes related to local industry, agriculture, and the U.S. Post Office. Here we have the former Broome Republican Building, now Burgard Monday. There were 3 newspapers that were published in this area. The Morning Sun at the corner of Shenango and Henry. You'll notice that this building, which curves around the corner rather than being at a right angle. The Bulletin was in Endicott before they merged to form the Sun Bulletin. And the Evening Press towards the courthouse, which we will see later. We're standing in front of the bus station, or rather the Intermodal Transportation Hub. Notice the Art Deco features of this building's facade. Bold lines, simple geometric shapes. The exterior face is the only part of this 2009 structure that is original. Can you see or can you imagine the Greyhound dog at the top of the sign actually running to get its customers to their destination on time? Now let's take a quick detour to Binghamton's west side and to Recreation Park, where we will meet our next guest, Mr. Rod Serling.
Everyone needs a hometown. Binghamton is mine. Ladies and gentlemen, presented for your edification, a small city on the edge of a large state. This city can be found on any map anywhere, but its boundaries are not those of geography. You see, this city exists in the Twilight Zone. My name is Rod Serling. I am a former resident of Binghamton, New York, and perhaps you've heard of me. I was born in Syracuse, New York, on December 25th, 1923. My parents moved to Binghamton when I was 3 years old. I grew up here. I played in Binghamton's parks. I rode the carousel. And I often listened to band concerts on the gazebo. My life changed direction when in high school I met a teacher named Miss Helen Foley. She encouraged me to join the debate team and the drama club. And she also encouraged me in my talent for writing. That set the pattern for my life. After graduating from what is now Binghamton High School, I joined the Army and fought in World War II in the Philippines. The things I saw there had a very great influence and impact upon my life. When I returned from the war, I attended Antioch College in Ohio. But Binghamton was always in my mind. It was at Antioch that I met my wife Carol, and we began a family. I worked a great many odd jobs to support my growing family, but always in my spare time I wrote. I wrote stories of fantastical things. After winning the second of what would become eventually 6 Emmy Awards, I found myself increasingly frustrated with the interference of corporate sponsors in my television productions. And so with my wife's backing and urging, I left corporate television behind. And in October of 1959, I launched The Twilight Zone, a weekly series that would take my viewers into a land whose boundaries were that of imagination. I chose science fiction and fantasy as the vehicles for my stories because I wanted to tell stories that mattered to the widest possible audiences. And a great many issues were forbidden in corporate television, issues that I felt mankind needed to discuss. And so I would have angels or aliens say the things my human characters were often not permitted to. When the Twilight Zone ended, I went on to other projects, including a very short-lived Western, canceled because it was too cerebral. I also did a show called The Night Gallery, which had its roots also in my beloved Binghamton. And I wrote a movie that perhaps you're familiar with called Planet of the Apes. I died in 1975, ironically, of a heart attack while undergoing the then new procedure of open heart surgery. I can't imagine what might have brought it on. I'm buried in Interlaken, New York, but I still return at whiles to my beloved Binghamton, as I did in life, to walk the streets, to experience the people, to feel the magic of this very special place. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll send you on your way, but I'll advise you to be careful as you walk out your door. You see, when you start out the door, you never know where you're going to end up. Sidewalks can take you anywhere, even into the Twilight Zone.
Look to the north. The Kilmer family made millions manufacturing swamp root medicine in that building. You probably know that Remlick's restaurant is Kilmer spelled backwards. The building has been beautifully restored. There are 3 more Kilmer buildings on this street, including one across the street from a United Presbyterian Church. This Presbyterian church was built during the Civil War. It replaced an earlier church that was destroyed by fire in 1862. It is the only Binghamton church that retains its tall wooden steeple. Unfortunately, we can't go inside tonight, but if you get a chance, stop by and look at the Tiffany mosaic that is in there. Charles Stone built the Stone Opera House in 1892. It is in the Richardsonian Romanesque style. You can tell by the rough-cut stone and the Roman arch. There was a fire in 1903 and it was rebuilt. It was converted to a movie theater in the 30s and then abandoned. This building has been neglected for years and is on P.A.S.T's most endangered list. When it was an opera house, famous actors appeared in the theater. Sarah Bernhardt, Ethel and John Barrymore, George M. Cohen, Margaret Truman, Edward G. Robinson, and W.C. Fields, to name a few. Another notable who visited Binghamton and the Stone Opera House was New York State Governor Theodore Roosevelt. In 1900, when he was campaigning for the U.S. presidency, Binghamton was a stop on his Whistle Stop campaign. After dinner at the Hotel Bennett, the campaign party moved to the Stone Opera House to greet a crowd at capacity. The Stone Opera House has been in disrepair for several years. Despite promises from an owner, the roof is caved in and perhaps the only thing that seems to be salvageable is the facade. The Press Building with 12 floors was Binghamton's tallest building before the State Office Building was constructed in 1972. Willis Sharp Kilmer built it in 1904. It is in the Beaux Arts style and the architect was T.I. Lacey. Originally, the building housed the Binghamton Press. Until the 1960s, passerby could watch the press as printing and folding the daily newspaper through the windows on the street level. The Kilmer name dominated this street with 3 more buildings. One is right next door, added in the 1920s. We've mentioned the other. Another is across from the United Presbyterian Church, and of course the Kilmer building that houses Remlick's restaurant. Security Mutual was founded in 1886 and is thought to be the oldest American insurance company in continuous existence. The firm was first located in the old Phelps Bank on the corner of Court and Shenango until it hired Truman I. Lacey to design its new headquarters. This is one of Lacey's finest buildings. Note the massive Romanesque arch at the entrance. This design is repeated around the windows of the upper floors, where you might catch sight of the peregrine falcon making its home. This is a magnificent ornate space with twin marble staircases. Note the dog's head over the entrance. It is not clear whose dog this was, but perhaps he represents the fidelity of the company. Someone was overheard to say it may have been the pet of the builder. Local artists were commissioned to paint the murals. Have you met Margaret Quinn?
Hello, good evening. Come a little closer so you can hear. And don't worry, you're not interrupting me. I was just rereading this letter I'd written to my family when I first arrived in Germany near the front lines in World War I. I was serving as a nurse at the U.S. Army Field Hospital. You see, I volunteered my services to the U.S. Army, and I began my military training at Camp Devens, Massachusetts for about 8 months. Then I was off to Alloy, France. The hospital there was bitter cold. We were low on supplies, and it rained nearly constantly. I practically had to wear my rubber boots all the time. At first, the military officers wanted to keep us nurses as far away from combat as possible, but it soon became evident that more men would survive if they got treatment while still at the front lines. So many of us worked at either a casualty clearing station or a forward military unit. And believe me, being so close to combat, rifle fire was constant. And I was even experienced a number of bombing raids. Thankfully, our pilots flew up there and chased those enemy bombers away. I remember the doughboys couldn't believe a woman would leave the comforts of her home to brave the battles just to help them out. But I was one of 10,000 trained nurses who served the Western Front in World War I. And despite the dangers, we did have our fun. The local regiments often had dances. I was once confined to barracks because I dared go to a dance with a private. Nurses were only supposed to go with officers. But I wanted to choose my own dance partners. And the men would sing songs to entertain or lift their spirits. I remember the old songs. The long, long trail, and over there, over there. They don't have such spirited songs nowadays. Apart from nursing, I had other duties. One of the toughest was writing letters for the hospitalized soldiers who were many on death's door. I often had to hold the letters back for a while just to be sure they would survive. But sometimes I had to write to a wife or a mother and let them know about a man's passing. That was tough. Nearly 13,000 people from Broome County served in World War I, and over 220 of them perished. After the war, I had the opportunity to see the Statue of Liberty on my way home. Oh, that was a wondrous sight. I was so proud to be an American. And when I got home, I continued my nursing services, but this time for the public schools. I worked for over 35 years in the Binghamton School District, and later I was honored for being the 500th member of the Broome County Barrack 666 Veterans of World War I. After my retirement, my former students would come and sit on the lawn while I played piano. And it's rumored You can hear it till this day.
The former public library was built in 1903 by the Lacey architectural firm, headed by Truman Lacey's brother and nephew. It was a gift from Andrew Carnegie, who commissioned over 1,600 libraries through the United States, 2,509 worldwide. In 2002, the county sold its library building to a downstate owner who neglected it for 10 years. P.A.S.T placed it on our list of endangered buildings. Finally, Broome County Industrial Development Agency took possession of the building by eminent domain in order to save it for community use. In 2016, SUNY Broome announced plans to transform the building into the SUNY Broome Culinary Arts Center. Their recent renovation respects and maintains the original design integrity wherever possible. One perk of membership to P.A.S.T was to attend a hard hat tour of the building. Let's stop at the gazebo to meet our next guest, George F. Johnson.
Good evening, folks. Let me introduce myself. Although my name might be rather familiar to you, it's on roads and bridges and libraries and schools throughout our community here in the Valley of Opportunity. It's even on one of the towns in the Triple Cities. The name is Johnson. I am George F. Johnson. I came from humble, well, actually poor beginnings up in Milford, Massachusetts. I came to what was then Leicestershire in 1881 with skills in shoe manufacturing and leatherworking and little else other than my ambition. I took a job at the Lester Brothers Shoe Company and rose to the rank of foreman. And when Henry B. Endicott came to take over and buy out the Lester Shoe Company, he took a chance on me too. He loaned me $150,000 to buy the company with him. And together we formed Endicott Johnson Shoe Company. And we grew our company. And as our company grew, our community grew. We attracted workers from all over the world who arrived at Ellis Island and asked, "Which way, EJ?" And they made our way to our little valley of opportunity. As our community grew, we invested in that community. We built houses, we built clinics, we built parks, we installed carousels. We believed that management and labor worked together in a cohesive unit, that their labor and our benefits combined made something called the square deal. And our employees and our management worked together in harmony for years. In the boom times, we created one of the first profit-sharing schemes in corporate history. In the lean times, during the Great Depression, we all cut back our hours so that everyone still had a job. And even if we had to go fish out of the rivers and pick dandelions on the hillsides, we got through it together as a corporate family. During World War I and World War II, we manufactured millions of pairs of boots so that our troops could march to victory. When the labor unions tried to come in, tried to disrupt the square deal, in 1940, over 80% of our workers voted to keep the unions out and reaffirm the square deal. That is one of the moments I was most proud of in my career. When I passed away in 1948, the people of our community honored me with one of the largest public funerals in American history. After my death, Endicott Johnson continued, but the waves of globalization and changes in fashion and manufacturing practices slowly eroded Endicott Johnson and the square deal. But I take pride and I'm honored by the fact that the institutions, the infrastructure that I helped foster here in the Triple Cities remains intact, and that my legacy remains intact. Thank you.
This is the fourth courthouse built on this location. A fire in 1896 took the standing courthouse. Local architect Isaac Perry won the bid to rebuild, and this structure, started in 1897, was ready by November of that same year. Notice the statue of U.S. Senator Daniel S. Dickinson. Dickinson was Binghamton's first president in 1834 when it was a village. Mr. Abel Bennett was its first mayor in 1867, and in 1864 Mr. Dickinson was considered as a possible vice presidential candidate to Abraham Lincoln. The Soldier and Sailors Monument in honor of Civil War veterans was completed in 1888. Let's meet our next guest, Abel Bennett.
I'm Abel Bennett, and I'm proud to be one of the visionaries of Binghamton's West Side. I was born in 1818, about 200 years ago, in Bennettsville, New York. Now, who do you suppose that was named after? That's right, it was my family who settled that area in Chenango County, where Bainbridge is today. Now, I never had much formal education, but I went to the School of Hard Knocks. I bet some of you have been there too, huh? I gained a keen business sense working for my grandfather in a mill in Chenango County. And I was always looking for opportunities. And I found one when I was 22. I moved to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania to work in a large department store called the Hard Times Store. Great name for a store, huh? Now, what was Wilkes-Barre known for back in those days? That's right, coal mining. And I saw an opportunity there. I noticed that it was taking a long time to get that coal from down in the mines up to the ground level. And I thought elevators would be a great way to solve that problem. So I invested in coal elevators, and I made a whole pile of money. I had enough money to buy the Pennsylvania Coal Company, and that made me even richer. And then in 1860, when I was 42 years old, I did the best thing I ever did in my whole life. I moved to Binghamton, New York. First thing I did when I got here was to buy a 53-acre farmland on what is now the west side of Binghamton. That was all rural back in those days. As my reputation grew, I became a member of the Binghamton Savings Bank, and that led to the founding of the first national bank, where I was the president for 20 years. In 1867, I helped incorporate the village of Binghamton to the city of Binghamton. And what's the first thing a city needs? Ha! That's right, a mayor. And who do you suppose the first mayor of Binghamton was? You can call me Mayor Bennett from now on. I continued to look for opportunities, and I noticed as our population was increasing, a railroad was coming through town and people were spending the night here. So I thought what we needed was a big hotel. And I built one, a 3-story hotel on Washington Street called, guess what? The Hotel Bennett. Hotel Bennett was there for nearly 100 years, finally being demolished in the 1960s. Something else I was involved with was founding the Susquehanna Valley Home for destitute children. I was appalled at the treatment that orphans received back in those days. They were thrown in the poorhouse with the derelicts and the criminals. We provided decent care to over 465 children, and I'm very proud of that. Later in life, I saw another opportunity. As our population was increasing in Binghamton, we needed a place for all these people to live. So I decided to split up my farmland into streets to build houses. Some of these streets are still there, and you might recognize them. For example, Bennett Ave. Who would have thought? There's Millard Ave, which is named after my son-in-law. Johnson Street, named after Adelaide Johnson, my first wife. And Lathrop Avenue, named after Eugenia Lathrop, my second wife. I had to stop getting married because I ran out of streets. Well, unfortunately for me, I wasn't around to see the completion of all those houses because I passed away in 1889. Today that area is known as the Abel Bennett Historic Tract. Who would have guessed? And it is part of the National Register of Historic Places. Today there's over 1,000 buildings in that tract, and now one of them is a gas station or a convenience store, and I'm very proud of that. So the next time you're traveling through the west side of Binghamton, think of me, Abel Bennett, and the contribution I made to our beautiful hometown.
Look at the Perry Building. It is the only cast iron building in Binghamton. It is considered to be one of the finest cast iron buildings in New York State. All of the elements of the building were cast in molds and then assembled. It must have been like playing with an erector set, or the more contemporary Legos. The cast iron construction permitted natural light inside the building from large window openings. This was an important feature in the days of dim gas lighting. Come by during the day and look at the elaborate decorative elements of the building. Isaac Perry was a premier architect here in Binghamton and throughout New York State. His office and home were here in this building. He is responsible for the courthouse behind us. He designed the Phelps Mansion Museum on Court Street and the Inebriate Asylum, also known as Castle on the Hill. He also designed several residences, and there are even 3 churches in Binghamton that were designed by Isaac Perry: St. Patrick's, First Congregational, and the current Landmark Church. And remember I said the building was cast iron? Let's meet our next guest, Catherine Bartoo.
My name is Catherine Bartoo. I was born in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, in America's centennial year, 1876. Even at an early age, I had 2 very strong interests. One was music. I loved to sing and play the harp, and I often could be heard doing both at local social events. My other passion was art. I tried various artistic styles, but eventually discovered an affinity for Impressionism, a style made famous by painters like Renoir and Degas. It became a very popular style of art, but when it first appeared, it was considered quite avant-garde. My interest in art led me to meet and eventually marry Alfred Bartoo, a fellow artist and an architect. Our first home was in New York City, where my day job, as you would call it, was doing commercial artwork for the Gerlach Calendar Company. I also had my own art studio, and many of my paintings, still lifes, portraits, landscapes, were displayed in galleries throughout New York City. In 1912, the New York Telegraph called me a widely admired portraitist. Alfred and I traveled and studied in Europe for several years, and finally made our home in Binghamton, where we became active in community life. We helped establish the Binghamton Fine Art Society, and were instrumental in collecting works of art to display in our building, which was located in the Carnegie Building across Exchange Street from the courthouse. After my death from cancer in 1949, that collection was relocated to the Roberson Mansion, where several of my paintings are still housed. I served on the board of directors for the Art Society for many years. In a 1934 listing of the board of director members, there are several men's names and 2 other women who are listed, as was the custom of the time, by their husband's first name. But my name appears as Mrs. Catherine Bartoo, an acknowledgement of my own identity. In the early 1900s, women artists were not very well known. I worked to correct that oversight by becoming active in the Society of Women Painters, and I organized a traveling exhibit of their works. Baltimore, Maryland was the first city to host that exhibit in 1912. Art was indeed a passion of mine. Another area of keen interest was the women's suffrage movement. The day in 1915 when the men in New York State denied women the right to vote by defeating the state suffrage amendment was the day I became an activist. I helped found the Binghamton chapter of the Women's Suffrage Party, and we held the meetings often, sometimes in Yiddish or Italian. We even conducted a suffrage school. We had bake sales, because everybody has bake sales to raise money, right? And I auctioned off several of my paintings to raise funds to travel across the state to encourage people to vote in favor of women's suffrage. Well, not everyone supported our cause, but finally our persistence overcame the resistance. And in November of 1917, the New York State Women's Suffrage Amendment was passed. I can recall the newspaper headline the next day that read, "Women frolic as New York State gives them the vote." I don't remember quite how much frolicking I did, but I can recall many milestone events that occurred during my lifetime. I once made a statement that sums up my philosophy of life. Art is a mission, a brightening of life, the lifting of the spirit of everyone it reaches, the creation of happiness. I believe that statement is still true today.
And before we leave tonight, let's make one last stop back to the west side of Binghamton and to the Harlow Bundy Mansion, where we will meet our final guest for this evening, Willard L. Bundy.
Well, it's about time you arrived. Let me introduce myself. I am Willard the Grand Bundy, at your service. And I am the inventor of the time machine, because it is all about time. I received my first patent on clocks in 1888 for a working man's timepiece. I revised it in 1891 so that we could record employees coming and going. No longer the need for that man writing on paper, the timekeeper, because it is about time. We relocated to Binghamton, New York, and my brother Harlow and I engaged in forming the Bundy Time Recording Company. Now, you may not have heard of the Bundy Time Recording Company. You might have heard of its son, International Time Recorder? No? Perhaps its grandson, International Business Machine. That is the munificence of my invention. To this day, over 100 years after my passing, my time recorders and my patents and my concept of time and information still exist and are still in use, generating billions of dollars in revenue for a multitude of companies, but most importantly, for my grandson, IBM. Now, we are trying to hold back the hands of time. I do have time cards with me for the punch recorders, and I see many people here that need to have time cards. Yes, 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 because we need to know when you're coming and going. We need to know that the timing is accurate for this event. You sign in, you sign out, actually you punch in and punch out. You know, my time on this earthly plane is dearly limited. Things that I've done have since passed into obscurity by the demolition crews. However, old building number 11 at North and McKinley still exists, the last of the Bundy Time Recording manufacturing plants. Help us save that building. And my brother's house still exists on Main Street in Binghamton. You know, Harlow was quite an individual, and I'm really quite a fan of what he did. If you want to see more of the time clocks, if you want to see more of the history, please come and visit the Bundy Museum. But one thing you must remember, without a past, we have no future. Now, the time cards, I did not say to you, you know, I travel through time with a friend of mine, and he tends to reap time. I don't know which of you tonight's time may be at end. You should check your time cards as you check out.
wasn't that fascinating, thanks again for joining us. I want to thank Mark Dickinson for the video and the editing, Ruth Levy, who had the bright idea back in 2008 to do this, and of course, our wonderful volunteer actor portrayals. Don't forget, you can become a member of P.A.S.T. or make a contribution toward this program by visiting our website, www.pastny.org. That's www.pastny.org, or giving our office a call, 607-237-0887. Don't forget to leave a message, of course. Or you could follow any of the links below. So come back next year. You never know who will raise from the dead.
I would sing you a song of the world and its ways, and the many strange people you meet. From the rich man who rolls in his millions of wealth, to the poor struggling wretch on the street. Though a man may be poor and in tatters and rags, we know that we ought not be tied. But remember the adage, we've all got to die, and 6 feet of earth make us all of one size.